r/ruleshorror. Hosted by you/jahorrible26. Eye for an eye and blood for blood. Humans are vile creatures by nature. After all, why would God have 4 horsemen at the ready to bring his wrath down upon us? It's cause from the day we are born each and every one of us has all 7 of the deadly running through our veins. Now that's not to say there are no good people, there are plenty whose good nature overcomes the bad, but the brutal truth is the wicked far outweigh the pure. It doesn't matter how kind you are, or how much good you do, there will always be someone to rip you apart and fill you with rage. From using a sharp tongue to manipulate you so they can stab you in the back with it, to someone using your face as a rung to climb the corporate ladder, you will experience the cruelty of humanity. Now I have no doubt some of you more vengeful spirits, you'd be willing to go through hell in order to make sure the cutthroat bastard will go through 10x worse. Well, if you're truly willing to suffer extreme pain, both physical and mental, then I can help you reach that vengeance. Now, in order to begin, there's a set of rules that must be followed, and it is very, very important you follow them to an exact T unless you want to end up dead, or worse. I'll start with some items you will need in order to successfully complete this ritual. 1. A decent sized blade, or any sharp object really. 2. A photo of the person you wish to reap your vengeance on, or their name written on a piece of paper, make sure it takes up the whole page. 3. 3 drinking glasses varying in sizes. 4. A large sack, or bag of some kind. 5. An open flame for light source. This could range from oil lanterns to candle light. 6. A desk or table with 2 chairs parallel to one another. 7. A rather full medical kit. 8. Lastly, you'll need a flask full of dark liquor along with 2 shot glasses. If you're not a drinker, suck it up. An unpleasant taste will be the least of your worries if you plan to go through with this, and he doesn't like to drink alone. Once you have everything needed, you are ready to move on to phase 2, in which you will prepare to start the ritual. Now read these carefully. Effectively following these rules will play a big role in your survival. 1. Start in an empty room, and I mean empty. Nothing but the items required you bring. 2. This room must have no more than 1 window. A completely windowless room would work just as well. 3. You may only do this when the sun is down. 4. Set the table up with the chairs, place a shot glass in front of each of the chairs, then place your flame in the center of the table along with the 3 drinking glasses. 5. Once the table is set, take a seat in one of the chairs, place the photo or paper on the table, take the blade and begin to add your blood onto it. A simple prick on the finger ain't gonna cut it either, know the majority of that paper must colored red by the end of your little bloodletting session. After you've finished, wrap the wound and wait. Not long after your light source will go out, only for a few moments, then suddenly return. Along with the light's return, will be the arrival of what looks like young 30-ish-year-old businessman. This man is anything but human though. No, across from you will be sitting a demon. Not just any demon either. No, across from you will be sitting Mammon, the father of greed, and true to his namesake, he is one stingy bastard. He will refuse to even talk to you until you've poured a shot for both you and him, make a toast to him, and drink. After he's enjoyed his drink, he will lean forward and ask what it is you want. Depending on what that is, he will make his trade offer. This offer will include 3 categories. 1. Curses. This is the category most people tend to go for, as it is the least life-threatening of the 3. If you wish to curse an enemy, you will pay with a cup of your own blood. The amount given will determine the duration of this curse, hence the different sized glasses. Filling the largest glass will cause a year's worth of bad luck, the smallest will cause a week's worth. You're free to trade as many glasses as you wish, but do keep in mind your body can only handle so much blood loss. 2. Sense elimination. Think you can live with 1 arm? Or would you mind spending the rest of your life seeing through a single eye? Well, offer him half of one of your 5 senses, and the person you wish to conflict this upon will have complete loss of that sense. Of course, there are some senses you can't exactly split in half, like taste or smell, so I wouldn't recommend bargaining with them, cause you'll be just as affected as the person you wish to condemn. 3. Fatal deals. If you hate someone to the point you'd gladly wish death upon them, well, this category for you, but it is rather costly. Rather than taking a physical part of you, he'll take parts of your sanity. The more pain you wish upon your victim will take a bigger toll on your mental state. Even if you wish for them to die quick and painlessly, doing so will still cost you greatly. This could range from severe amnesia to setting you straight on the path that leads to padded rooms and straitjackets. I'm sure some of you are thinking, oh, simple, I'll give a decent amount of blood and leave it at that. But do remember, you are bargaining with a demon, and not just any demon, but the very source from which the deadly sin of greed flows, a member of Lucifer's elites. He will not be satisfied with a few of glasses. With each drop of blood, and each ounce of flesh, he will haggle and try persuading you to give more. He will try to squeeze you for all you're worth, stripping you down to the bone or rotting your brain to mush if able. In all honesty, you will most likely fall for at least one of these bribes, as he's very good at getting into people's heads. He will mention the smallest details of how this person hurt you, adding fuel to any burning rage inside of you, tempting you to wreak more havoc upon them. So remain vengeful, but remain aware. Remember, you're there for your vengeance to drive you, not consume you. Once you're satisfied with the amount of damage you've caused to your victim, or you've simply lost too much blood to continue, thank him for his time, then blow out your flame. Not long after, you'll be waking up in the hospital nearest to your home, finding your wounds seemingly well treated. Don't worry about the bills, you'll find a mysterious young man in a business suit have paid them off for you shortly before you awoke. Now, why would the devil of greed shell out cash for you? Simple, human currency comes to mammon more common than a morning piss, but someone willing to pay with blood, simply to feed their wrath? No, someone like that is far more valuable than a piece of paper with some schmuck's face on it. Wouldn't want to lose a potential regular now, would he? Now, depending on what you paid with, the results will either be extremely obvious, or subtle. If you went for a simple blood drive, then you'd have to personally keep an eye on the person you've cursed with the bad luck, but don't worry, from that day to the last of the curse will be full of misery. Now, if the pain you wished upon this person is more on the physical side, well, turn on the TV and a breaking news report will be on, talking about a certain enemy of yours being in a terrible accident that either took a part of them, or their lives, but maybe that's not enough for you. Maybe you aren't satisfied with the amount of torment you casted upon them, or maybe there's more you feel deserve similar treatment. Well, he's certainly not one to turn down a customer. Posted by you/Jahorrible26. Drinking problem. Back in high school, we had this one teacher, Mr. Horace, who was a near-perfect history teacher. Never dropped any huge payloads of works, always willing to give kids who were behind extra opportunity to raise their grades, and on top of that, he was very engaged with his class. There was just one problem. It was apparent he had a bit of a drinking habit. There would be days he'd come in with the faint smell of whiskey on him, or going to his desk and smelling his coffee was made Irish style. However, it never affected his teaching, so for the most part it went under the radar. It was obvious he had a strong love for historical moments, willing to gush of the discoveries of land or historical documents and revolutionary breakthroughs. Almost everything, aside from wars, he hated talking about wars. Only teaching the basics of the more well-known ones, and very rarely answered questions regarding them. I always found it strange how such a history buff as himself disliked talking about them. I assumed he was just kind of a hippie. After all, nobody exactly liked war, well, unless you're a sadist. It wasn't until after graduation I figured out what truly caused him to turn to the bottle. You see, in our school, teachers sharing political or personal questions with students was a big no-no, so Mr. Horace had an agreement with all his students. He said the day we graduate, seeing as we weren't students anymore, we could feel free to stop in and talk all about that kind of stuff. I think he just did that so people would stop asking, as it was very rare a student actually did that, being more focused on getting plastered and making terrible decisions at whoever is throwing a graduation party. Well, I just so happened to be one of these students. I honestly wasn't planning on it, but as I passed his classroom seeing him at his desk, I was reminded of our deal. "Ah, Mr. Bartlett, anything I can help you with?" he asked as I knocked on the door. I told him it was time to talk politics, and for a while we just talked about random stuff like where we stood on certain topics, but then one question I've had since day one returned to mind. "Why do you hate teaching about wars? Any other subject about history you're on like flies on shit, except those?" I asked. He paused for a moment. He looked a little upset it was asked, but didn't have a real problem answering it other than letting out a brief sigh. "Well, I was in the service," he said as he undid his button up enough to show a tattoo, one of a combat knife, with 2 arrows behind it, and 3 yellow stripes behind them. "Holy shit, you're Green Beret?" I asked. I could feel my jaw physically drop the second my eyes fell on that tattoo. I grew at least 1,000 more levels of respect for my former teacher, along with a little fear. I can't explain why exactly, just something about finding your favorite teacher was a former Special Forces soldier who probably knows how to kill a man with his pinky in 10 different ways. He continued with the conversation as he rebutted his shirt, before taking a long sip from his coffee. "Almost 17 years spent in the swamps, fields and jungles of Nam," he said, taking another, much larger sip from his mug. "Don't get me wrong, Neil, I'm proud I served my country, and I won't lie when I say being skilled enough to be considered one of our military's elites is a bit of an ego trip, but after taking the life of a man, of men, I'll never be able to consider myself a good man after what I've done during my times with a rifle in my hands and a sack of ammo on my back. I can try to justify it by chalking it up to things war is hell, or if it wasn't him it would have been me, but blood's something you'll never be able to wash from your hands. I almost immediately regretted my decision to ask the question in the first place, as I saw talking about it, even in the slightest way, caused arguably the only teacher I liked, so much pain and sorrow. Which made the next question I asked all the more painful to hear come from my mouth. I knew it was a terrible thing to even bring up to someone you genuinely care about. Especially after discovering he witnessed and went through firsthand, the most personal way physically or mentally possible violence and destruction even the devil himself would need time to think of. I couldn't help myself though. It was the only kind of gossip about the man, because it was literally the only negative about the man. So it stuck out like a sore thumb, that had been lit on fire, shined on with NYC Broadway quality spotlight. Is that why you drink? I asked, instantly damning myself for even considering asking. To my complete shock however, he didn't get mad or that upset. He simply let out a soft laugh. So I was that obvious, huh? Go close the door and lock it, seeing as you're the first students in years to actually take me up on that agreement. I'll tell you, he said. I did so with a slight spring in my step before returning to my seat. He opened the center drawer of his desk, pulling out a flask and opening it. No point hiding it from you now, he said with a small chuckle, before that more serious face returned. Yes, that is why I drink, not for the reasons you'd think however, he said before taking a long swig. It was just near the end of my final year. We had been stationed in a large swamp field. Worst place to camp out in, nothing but mud and trench foot for months. Aside from the unpleasant terrain however, that was probably the quietest year of my service, 2 brief firefights, only 3 wounded. Hell, it was world peace compared to the years that came before it. He began, before pausing a bit. For a while anyways, he continued taking another swig. Till one night, I'd say a shy past midnight, screams of bloody murder, screams of fear he trailed of for a bit before continuing. Didn't sound like any of our men, but they were certainly US soldiers, and from the sounds of it came across one of them tiger pits, or whatever traps those bastards set up. The moon was extremely bright that night, and it was close by. So me along with 4 other men grabbed our guns and set out to maybe help. What we came across has been carved into memories till the day I die. I could see him physically shaking for a moment, before recomposing himself. We were right about them buying US, sure as hell didn't come across no trap. He trailed off once more, downing almost half his flask before continuing. These 2 kids were splattered across the wet mud and gunk ground. Their organs had been seemingly ripped out in perfect condition, and their flesh had been stripped completely off their bones, yet whatever did this took those bones, leaving little more than a sack of empty skin and muscle. Whatever the hell did this was not human, that much was clear, only made clearer, after hearing Henson firing off his rifle down into the swampy ground. It was at this moment I realized just how much Mr. Horace was affected by whatever had happened, a face of pure fear I've never seen on anyone before. Started spouting off about how it was in the water as he emptied a whole magazine into the squishy wet ground. We all thought he was just loosing it after what we just found, but as he frantically went to reload his gun, a long tentacle wrapped itself around the poor bastard. Whatever it was had scales that almost shined in the moonlight, and it looked to be lined with large hook-like teeth. All the kid could get out was a terrified help before the thing twisted itself around him tighter, bursting him like a water balloon. Before we could even react, another one emerged, grabbing onto Kaiser and sucking him down into the marsh, then spitting up his lower half, then another coming to launch itself down Carver's throat, then turning him inside out. Luckily Gonzalez was smart enough to get out of there before he could get grabbed. Kid was too young to die, especially like that, he said softly. He stopped speaking for a minute. And you? I asked. He sighed and finished his flask. I was too paralyzed in fear to move. I fell to my knees, and met the creature's eye. A large-scaled amphibious/reptilian hybrid, kind of like a toad, mixed with a crocodile, and one large yellow eye sitting above an elongated jaw lined with those same hooked teeth. At first all I could do was stare into its eye. It was as if the thing was studying me. I don't know, it didn't just dispose of me like my comrades, but it gave me enough time free myself from paralysis. Pulling a grenade from my vest, I shoved it into the creature's oversized mouth and ran till my legs gave out, decided I had enough of Nom after that, and was honorably discharged due to a psychotic break. He finished, before shaking his head and giving a soft smile. Wow, haven't talked about that in years, haven't thought about them for years, he said, looking at his coffee, before opening his classroom window and pouring the rest out. It's been about 4 years since that conversation. I almost completely forgot about it, till my girlfriend brought up traveling the world. She's always been an adventurous type. Don't you want to see what's outside of this country? She asked as we sat at the breakfast table. After all, she began. I hear Vietnam is beautiful this time of year. And I won't lie, part of me is curious to see if that beast still remains in those swamps. Posted by you/Jahorrible26. The night the moon shut down. From the very start of the morning, I knew the day wasn't gonna be a typical one. The very second I sat up in bed, I was hit with a strange sense of unease. This feeling increased as I began to look over my room, where everything just looked wrong. Not necessarily different, just off. Picture frames seemed to be moved over or back by an inch, the walls seemed to be painted an ever so slightly more dull white, and my dressers seemed to be made from a slightly smoother wood than the original oak. Hell, even my bed felt different, being just a little softer than normal. I sat there for a few moments in puzzled confusion. The only thing I can compare the feeling I had in that moment, would be the feeling going to do something only to forget what it was you were going to do the moment you reach your destination. Taking up just enough space in your mind to dig at you and slightly drive you mad till you figure it out. This feeling only increased as my wife stepped into the room. "You slept longer than normal," she said softly as she curled her hair for the day. I looked at her in confusion. I was undoubtedly looking at my wife, yet even she seemed different. Her hair was a slightly lighter brown, her eyes seemed to be a darker green, even her voice was off, sounding just slightly higher and a tiny bit raspy. She must have caught on to my looks of confusion, as she quickly spoke up again. "Is something wrong?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. So rubbed my eyes and shook my head slightly. "Yeah, I'm all right, I think I'm just a little too tired," I responded, trying to brush off my confusion as I pulled the blanket off of me, and placing my feet on the floor. "Well, better wake up, you have work," she said with a giggle as she returned to finish her morning routine. I did so, getting out of bed as I too began to prepare for my day. As I did, so I noticed these slight alterations spread throughout my whole house. Colors on the wall paintings seemed to be a darker shade, the bathroom floor seemed to have changed from a marble to smooth granite-like material, hallways seemed longer or shorter than normal, and the stairs seemed to have had an extra step. I quickly came to learn this anomaly wasn't restricted to my house either, as everything about my drive to work didn't seem right. Businesses seemed to have switched locations with the buildings next to them, traffic lights ran longer, and street signs had been rearranged. The thing that stuck out most to me, however, was the amount of businessmen that were out and about. This isn't exactly a huge town, and definitely not a lot of businesses that require its employees to dress in three-piece suits, yet what felt like every other block, I'd see at least 2 or 3 walking on the sidewalk and such. I wouldn't have taken too much notice of this if it weren't for all the other small changes I've experienced up to that point. What unnerved me most about them was how they acted. It felt as if they were robotic. Their faces all looked the exact same. They all looked like 20-something-year-old guys with extremely pale skin and freckles. Despite all having the face and build of a freshly graduated college student, they all had snow-white hair that had been slicked back. Even more unnerving than seeing handfuls of the same exact man, was the way it felt like they were watching me, just barely catching them in the corner of my eye, and if I couldn't catch them staring, I could almost feel it, as if they were looking right into my soul. By the time I had arrived to my office, I had mostly dismissed these slight alterations to my life, only briefly acknowledging them if I were to notice it and leaving it there. It wasn't until halfway through my shift I began to worry again. As I was finishing up some paperwork before going on to my lunch break, my coworker and longtime friend, Keith, stopped into my office. "Hey Greg," he announced with a knock on the door. As I looked up, the very first thing I noticed was, unlike everything else today, he was the exact same Keith I remember whole life. Same shade of blonde hair, same color of brown eyes, his voice didn't have a single change in pitch or tone. This took me back for a moment, as now one of the most regular parts of my life has become the strangest thing I've experienced all day. This bewilderment only grew as I noticed a similar look of confusion on his face. After a brief pause, I was able to respond. Yeah, what's up?" I asked. I saw him look side to side, watching over his shoulders as if scanning the area, before stepping in and closing the door. What he said next made the world stand still for a moment. "Have things seemed off to you lately?" I could feel my jaw physically drop when those words left his mouth. That action seemed to be all the clarification he needed as he took a deep nervous sigh and stood up. "We should grab a drink after work, talk about our days," was all he said before leaving my office. I didn't need much explanation on what it was about our days he wanted to talk about. "I know I can be forgetful at times," he began, taking a large drink from his bottle as we sat at our now not so regular bar. He damn near chugged the thing before putting down his drink. "But I've been married to Candace for 6 years, man. I know what my wife looks like," he finished in a brief panic. "And my boys, they aren't the same. There is absolutely no way I'd forget even the smallest features of my own children," he continued as he waved the bartender for another drink, his panic only growling. I tried my best to comfort him. I was just as confused and worried as he was. In fact, probably less so. I had a hard time processing the fact my wife had changed. I couldn't even imagine waking up one morning to see my own kids had changed too. I opened my mouth to begin to speak, but I felt my throat close after what I saw next. "Keith, they're here," I whispered, trying to stay natural as three identical gray-haired businessmen entered the bar, and sat in a booth only a few feet away. He gave a small nod, and we silently agreed it was time to leave. We each ordered one more beer, and struck up a half-assed conversation about work, as we decided leaving the moment they arrived would only raise suspicion. After hastily finishing our final beers, we paid for the tab, and left. We began to speculate who or what those men are on our walk back to our cars. "Who knows, maybe we're just sharing the same bizarre dream," I said lightheartedly, trying to ease the situation, yet as I turned my head to face him, I noticed I had been walking alone. I looked back to see he had stopped walking maybe 2 yards behind me, just staring up into the sky. I walked over to him and shook him on the shoulder. "Keith, you alright?" I asked, to no reply. "Keith?" I repeated, shaking his shoulder harder. "Are the stars going out?" He muttered under his breath, just barely loud enough to hear. "What?" I asked. His only response was to point to the sky. I looked up to see it full of stars, till one disappeared with the blink of an eye, then another, and another. Dozens of stars being snuffed out in a single instance. Some would flicker like a busted light bulb before going dark, then the big one happened. As if God himself flipped Earth's light switch off, the moon, along with any light it casts, disappeared from the sky. It was for the briefest of moments, maybe 5 seconds in total, but for those 5 seconds the world had gone completely black, as if we had been sent to a pure void of darkness, yet the sight of what came with the return of the moon was far more worrying. We were frozen in fear as we met ourselves being completely surrounded by a horde of these suited men, some holding rather large briefcases. Some were murmuring amongst each other, some speaking into a cell phone. Most of it just jumbled into a mess of sounds, but I could make out some words. They were saying things like members 3 and 5 are awake, or set 4 is having difficulties. I remember getting ready to explode with rage and confusion at these strange men, but before I could, they began to open their briefcases. Inside was a small radio-like machine built into it, and a unison began to play a loud, high-pitched set of static and screeches. Seconds after those noises drilled into my ears, I passed out, before waking in an absurdly clean office. I had been sat in a large leather seat in front of a large marble desktop. Across from me, a suited man. He wasn't like the others though. He was of older age, I guess late 40s, early 50s. He had light tan, and his hair was a much darker gray. He wore a white business suit, made from what looked like silk. He had been filling out some form, before looking up at me through a pair of rimmed glasses and smiling. As he did, the first thing I noticed was just how unholy his eyes were. Faded orange irises, surrounded by a dirty faded yellow. He cleared his throat before sitting up. "Hello, Gregory, it seems you've found yourself in quite the situation," he said in an almost patronizing tone, a shit-eating grin filling his face. "Who?" I began before being quickly cut off. "Slow your horse, Greg, I already have your answers," he continued as he opened his desk drawer. "No, you are not dead, or dreaming," he started as he began rummaging through his desk, occasionally clicking his tongue. "No, I am neither God or the devil, but yes, I am indeed a devil," he continued as he fished out a small wood box. "Yes, you are currently outside the realms of your reality," he spoke as he fished a large Cuban cigar from the box. "Yes, your friend Keith is fine and is currently having an interview of his own with my co-owner, and no, you will not stuck here forever, although that is strictly on account of your dumb luck and some technical difficulties on the lighting department's end." He finished as he struck a match and lit the cigar, before taking a long drag, then pulling out a small egg timer, setting it and placing it down, before looking to me again. "So any more questions?" he asked, tapping some ash off his smoke. At first I could just sit there in pure confusion, before a single thing could come to mind. What the hell was that? He gave another wicked grin, removing the cigar from his mouth. Television was all he would answer with. "What?" I muttered out, trying to wrap my head around the fact a literal demon is telling me I just lived a day in the Truman Show. He took another long drag from his cigar before continuing. "Well, even deity and omnipotent beings need good entertainment, and sorry to break it to you, but to beings like us, the entertainment you humans create has equal levels of enjoyment as watching paint dry. So I had an idea, if we can't get entertainment from the things you humans create, why not make entertainment out of the human themselves," he said with the charisma of a used car salesman. "I like to call it alternative reality TV. We'll take your regular everyday person, bring them here and place them in a perfect simulation of their worlds, ever so gradually changing the scenery till they go mad, or if they have a couple horseshoes shoved up their ass they'll luck out like you and come across some offset problems." It took a few seconds for me to realize, but when I did, all color left my face. He must have picked up on this as his grin somehow widened even more. "Yup, Today might be the first time you've noticed things have changed, but this damn sure wasn't your first episode, he said as he softly chuckled in a malicious tone. Before I could ask anything else, however, the egg timer he had placed on his desk began going off. Oh well, looks like that's all the time we have. So Gregory, thank you for your time on the show, and seriously, thank whatever God you believe in for the miracle of faulty wiring, he spoke before standing up. The next thing I remember was waking up in what looked like a resting spots for bus stops, just one big room with a single long bench in the middle. I quickly ran out only to see this strange building was located next to my office building, and seemingly just popped up out of nowhere. Seeing my car parked in my regular spot, I didn't take time to think on it, simply rushed over and drove home as fast I could. The moment I stepped through the door, my eyes met with my wife's. She quickly broke down into tears, first giving me a hard smack before collapsing into my arms screaming bloody murder, asking where I've been. All I could do was collapse myself and go into a brief panic attack once she told me both Keith and I had been missing for nearly 2 months, apparently disappearing only moments after work. We went to the hospital immediately, and once we got there and they started questioning me, it seemed I only had 2 options. Tell them the truth, or tell them I have no clue, which wasn't a complete lie. I went with the latter, coming to the conclusion pretending to be an amnesiac would put me at much less risk of spending my remaining years in a padded room than if I told them I was trapped in some sort of alternate dimension TV show. I've developed some serious OCD since then, and passing by any man dressed in a suit will always put me in a brief state of shock and paranoia. Keith ended up going into therapy from what he's told me, but obviously he hasn't shared any real details about our abduction. Said he explains it as a reoccurring nightmare, but of course that doesn't give the therapist any real ammo to truly help him through the actual situation. He's since then quit our job, deciding to find work that can be done from home, only ever leaving if absolutely needed. I should consider myself lucky that I haven't been reduced to agoraphobe, but to be honest, it probably won't stay that way much longer.